The twin auroras of Orelon shimmered above the capital, casting waves of indigo light across towers shaped from living crystal. Air skimmers drifted through the sky like silver birds, humming softly between the spires, while thousands of alien tongues wove a restless chorus through the night. At the crest of the cliff, overlooking waterfalls that glowed with liquid amethyst, stood the opulent Draxel Dominion estate, a palace built not by brilliance, but by conquest. Inside its marble corridors, a human man knelt in chains, his wrists rubbed raw from endless labor. Jonas Hale scrubbed the floor while noble guests strolled past him with the same interest they might give a broken tool. His back was bent, his spirit battered, but his eyes burned with something his captors had failed to extinguish. High above, in the moonlit gardens where luminescent petals unfurled like living lanterns, Serenia Draxel stood alone. Her skin was the deep sapphire of the ocean's last drop of daylight, and her hair, thousands of delicate, shimmering filaments, moved as if stirred by a gentle current. Her body lived in freedom, but her heart had long been caged. What would take place between the enslaved human and the noble alien woman would shatter every law that held their worlds together, rewriting not only their destinies, but the meaning of freedom itself. The Draxel estate dominated the clifftop like a monument carved to intimidate. Holographic banners flickered along the outer walls, each showing the house sigil, a four-eyed serpent coiled around a burning comet. Jonas had belonged to this family for 8 relentless months. He'd been captured by raiders, dragged across star systems, and finally purchased by High Counselor Varric Draxel for a disturbing sum. Now he wore the slate-gray uniform of domestic property, a neural restraint embedded beneath the skin of his chest. The great hall soared 3 stories high, lined with gleaming relics taken from fallen civilizations. Jonas scrubbed beside a dozen other enslaved beings. A 6-armed Cyrixan, 2 glass-skinned, Valori twins whose shared telepathy had been surgically ripped apart. Pathetic creature, Varric sneered as he descended on an anti-grav platform, the jagged ridges along his skull glowing with violet heat. I should have returned it for a refund. Or toss it into the blood pits, his son Cavrax added, casually kicking over Jonas's cleaning bowl. Laughter erupted from the armored nobles celebrating Orelon's newest conquest. On the balcony above them, Serenia stood motionless. Her tendril hair drifted like strands of living starlight, and the look in her eyes was a crime by her people's standards. Compassion. For months she had secretly watched the human. She had seen the quiet dignity he kept even when humiliated, how he shared scraps of food with weaker captives, how he endured without surrender. The human accompanies me to the Tribunal Conservatory tomorrow, Varric announced to his guests. I intend to display our more unusual acquisitions. Jonas didn't react, but tension flickered through his hands. Above him, Serenia's fingers curled tightly around the balustrade. For 10 years she had endured a political marriage to Varric, smiling while the Dominion wiped entire colonies from star maps. Wife, Varric called sharply. Attend. Serenia descended with practiced grace. As she passed Jonas, their gazes brushed for barely a heartbeat. Yet in that single moment, something undeniable moved between them. A recognition. 2 prisoners trapped in different cages, seeing their own suffering reflected back. That night Serenia wandered the glowing gardens, wondering if freedom could ever be found in someone who wore chains. And below, in the cold chambers where servants slept, Jonas stared at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of a woman whose eyes held oceans of grief. Long after midnight, while the estate lay silent, Jonas traced the faint ridges, beneath his collarbone, the circuitry of the neural restraint. He had studied its patterns for weeks, memorizing its layout like a map to salvation. The next morning, the Tribunal Conservatory shimmered like a shrine to Dominion supremacy. Plants stolen from dozens of worlds grew in isolated biomes, each tagged with the date their civilization had fallen. Jonas was sealed inside a containment sphere beside the gravity-woven fountain, where water streamed upward toward the sky. Other beings hovered beside him in similar prisons. The human intrigues me, rumbled Governor Thalvorn, circling the display. I hear their kind is volatile. The neural restraint keeps it docile, Varric replied, though I've considered more aggressive conditioning. The nobles laughed with chilling enthusiasm. A demonstration, perhaps? Proposed Commander Rylox. Let's hear what noises it makes. Varric pressed a control on his wristband. Agony blasted through Jonas's nervous system. His limbs jerked violently, muscles spasming as electricity tore through him. Blood trickled from where he bit down hard on his lip. Creatures in neighboring spheres turned away, unable to bear watching. 30 seconds, 45, a full minute. Jonas never screamed. Faulty, Varric said with irritation. Utterly disappointing. Or, murmured Elder Scholar Miralith, an ancient Dominion historian, perhaps the human possesses fortitude. Their species once upheld beliefs that suffering could be chosen for the sake of principle or defiance. Her words hung in the air as Jonas trembled, breathing harshly but still alive, still silent, still unbroken. A hush fell over the gathering as Elder Miralith's philosophical musing unsettled several of the Dominion nobles. The idea of dignity, of chosen suffering, seemed almost offensive to them. Perhaps, she said, adjusting the controls on Jonas's containment sphere, we test something more intellectual. Sound channel open. Her eyes met his through the barrier. Human, state your identifier. Jonas Hale, he answered steadily. Systems engineer, formerly of exploration vessel Resilience. And what have you learned of the Dominion that holds you? Jonas's gaze swept across the assembled aristocrats, reading each expression as though cataloging them. I understand your empire stretches across 47 star systems, taken through relentless conquest. I understand your doctrine, claims that dominance creates its own morality. Might is your compass, force your justification. I understand you view lives like mine as disposable extensions of labor. Silence thickened like fog. And I understand, Jonas continued, voice eerily calm, that every empire born from its own arrogance eventually collapses. Not always from rebellion, though. That happens, but because a society unable to recognize worth beyond its reflection eventually stops recognizing value in anything at all. A few nobles shifted uneasily. Elder Miralith laughed softly. Fascinating. This one carries something volatile. Her smile deepened. Hope. He is not available for trade, Varric snapped. Enough, Serenia, with me. But Serenia didn't move. She stood frozen, her gaze drawn irresistibly to Jonas. As she passed his sphere, she halted. For 3 unbroken seconds, she met his eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely sound yet undeniably real. When the gathering dispersed, Commander Rylox approached Varric with a grim expression. That human is a threat. I advise immediate disposal. Varric glanced at his wife in the transport ahead, seated stiffly apart with her gaze fixed on the conservatory gardens. Perhaps, he murmured, someone else also requires a reminder of the cost of misplaced compassion. The punishment chamber was built to swallow sound completely. Jonas hung suspended from anti-gravity locks, the neural restraint torn off not as a kindness, but so Varric could hear every noise he made. You humiliated me today, Varric said calmly, pacing with a plasma lash coiled in his hand. The first strike cracked across Jonas's skin like burning thunder. This time, without spectators, Jonas's pain had no witness but his tormentor. And this time, he screamed. As each blow landed, Varric spoke between the impacts, his voice cold and instructional. You are an evolutionary accident. Your species stumbled into crude star travel like vermin creeping into a machine. You were always waiting for a civilization with vision to correct the mistake of your existence. The lash fell again, and again, and again. Blood streaked the floor beneath Jonas, but some quiet ember inside him refused to die. Maybe it was the memory of that whisper. Forgive me. You're wrong, Jonas rasped, barely audible. My species is falling, just slower than me. Varric lifted the whip for a strike meant to cripple. The chamber door swept open. Serenia stood there. Consort, she said, composed but trembling. A priority message from High Magistrate Railthor. Marked urgent. Varric exhaled with irritation, lowered the whip and handed it to a guard. Return the property to its quarters, he ordered. And control your impulses, wife. Sympathy breeds foolishness. The door sealed behind him. Serenia dropped to her knees beside Jonas's collapsed body. I'm so sorry, she breathed. I shouldn't have looked at you. I made everything worse. It isn't your fault, Jonas managed. She retrieved a compact medical kit from her robe, activating a cellular regenerator that hummed gently as it mended torn tissue. Her hands trembled as she worked, closer to him than she had ever dared come. Why did you come here? Jonas asked, voice cracked but curious. Because I'm exhausted, she admitted slowly. Exhausted from pretending brutality is virtue. Exhausted from living a life scripted for me before I was old enough to understand. I had no choices at all. Her eyes glistened. And because when you spoke of empires collapsing, you were describing my own existence. For a moment, I wasn't alone. You're turning me into something symbolic, Jonas whispered. I'm not special. You're wrong, she said. You still believe suffering can have meaning. Most in your position only want silence. Most aren't engineers, he said faintly. The hint in his tone made her freeze. What does that mean? It means I've spent 8 months studying your systems. Your technology is sophisticated, but it's built on principles I can follow. Every mechanism has flaws, blind spots its designers never imagined. Serenia felt her breath catch. You're planning escape, she whispered. I'm planning my own death, Jonas corrected, but on my terms. If I can disable my collar without triggering redundancy protocols, I can die without giving Varric the pleasure. His words should have horrified her. Instead, something else stirred. The restraint has 3 failsafes, she said quietly. 2 share a common power conduit. If that conduit is overloaded at the moment a false diagnostic runs, she cut herself off. No, I shouldn't be telling you this. Jonas met her eyes, pained but steady. Because if I fail, he said, Varric will know someone guided me. And there's only one person who would. Something irreversible passed between them. A line crossed. An alliance born. Teach me, Jonas said softly. Only enough to understand the theory. The moment I teach you anything, Serenia whispered, I become a traitor in full. There is no partial treason. Then why, Jonas asked gently, are you still here? Serenia drifted toward the tall window overlooking the glowing terraces below. The bioluminescent gardens shimmered like constellations scattered across the earth. She rested a hand against the glass. When I was a child, she said softly, I dreamed of studying xenovergence, how flora from distant systems learned to survive when replanted in foreign soil. I used to sneak into the conservatory at night and imagine root networks reaching toward one another, connecting beneath the ground even when nothing above suggested they belonged together. She turned toward Jonas, her luminous tendrils drifting with the motion. That's why I'm still here. Something in you reminded me that displaced things sometimes refuse to die. Jonas shook his head slowly. What you're describing isn't survival. It's rebellion. Rebellion needs armies, she replied gently. This is different. This is just 2 beings who refuse to accept the world as it was handed to them. She reached the doorway, pausing as though caught between duty and something far more dangerous. The estate's technical archives are available through the household net. If someone happened to explore sections on neural interface maintenance, it wouldn't raise suspicion. Captives often search their limitations. Those records aren't monitored closely. Before he could reply, she slipped out of the room, leaving Jonas with possibilities he had never dared imagine just hours earlier. 3 weeks passed. In stolen moments, Jonas devoured the technical library. Schematics, maintenance logs, quantum relay manuals. He learned that neural restraints needed periodic recalibration, and for a fraction of a second, their kill switches paused. At that precise instant, with the correct harmonic pulse, a collar could be convinced its wearer was already dead, shutting down rather than detonating. Theoretically, on the 23rd night, using guard rotation data quietly shared by the 6-armed Cyrixon, Jonas broke routine. He slipped through the service passages and entered the garden paths where Serenia walked after sundown. You realize this is recklessly foolish, she murmured as he approached. If Varric checks movement logs, he won't, Jonas said. Your systems learn to ignore patterns that repeat. As long as I stay within your shadow on their sensors, neither of us exists. Her tendrils flickered with unease. And you learned that from the technical archive? No, he said. From being an engineer. Serenia lowered herself onto the edge of the levitating fountain. Water spiraled upward in glowing ropes, the hum disguising their voices. Why risk coming to me? She asked. Because I need to know, Jonas said, whether you meant it. What you said about being tired of silence. She looked away. I did mean it. But meaning something doesn't equal acting. Every time I imagine taking a step, I remember what happens to traitors. The Dominion wipes out bloodlines. Entire families vanish. So we do nothing? Jonas asked quietly. No, she said. I'm trying to understand what you expect of me. Jonas moved closer, lowering his voice. I've been thinking about what you said about transplanted life. How species not meant to coexist sometimes knit themselves together in the dark. You and I, we're transplanted too. You through an arranged union, me through chains. That's a metaphor, Jonas, she whispered. It isn't a plan. It's a start, he said. He gestured toward the gardens, toward the alien blooms gathered from conquered worlds, each glowing softly in its isolated biome. This estate displays trophies, Jonas said. But those trophies are alive, growing, adapting, and somewhere beneath this soil, their roots are meeting, slowly, quietly, creating something the Dominion can't control unless it destroys the entire garden, which it won't because the garden is a symbol. Serenia felt something rising inside her. Fear. Yes, but also a long-suppressed spark of defiance. You're talking about resistance, she whispered. I'm talking about genuine survival, he replied. Not enduring. Not waiting. Living, and I can't do that alone. He stepped closer still. We're kept isolated on purpose, separate, powerless, but if connections form, small ones, invisible ones, the Dominion won't notice until it's too late. Serenia let out a slow, trembling breath. You want me to organize a slave uprising with… What, words? Courage? No, Jonas said. Forget weapons. That's not how transplanted things endure. They endure by spreading quietly, root by root, building networks unseen from above. And one day those roots are strong enough to crack stone. His voice gentled. I need your help. Not to fight, not even to escape, to connect, to create something beneath the surface of this place. He met her glowing eyes. And I'm asking you because you belong to both worlds. You can move between them. You're the bridge the rest of us can't be. Serenia's voice dropped to a whisper. If I help you, this won't stay contained to the estate. It will echo, spread. And when the Dominion realizes what's happening, their answer will be absolute destruction. I know, Jonas said. And I'm still asking. You understand what that means? It means accepting that nothing can grow here. That all we will ever be are ornaments in someone else's story. And I won't accept that. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft song of rising water. Serenia rose slowly to her feet, her bioluminescent tendrils glowing in shifting hues of blue and gold. I'll help you, she said. Not because I believe we'll win, but because I'm finished being a decorative flower in someone else's garden, pretty, powerless, and dying in a place chosen for me. Jonas exhaled, hope flickering at the edges of his exhaustion. Then we start small, he said. Serenia's voice came out in a whisper that sounded more like a plea than a question. I need a way to speak with the others. Not in glances. Not in coded gestures. Actual conversations. Actual planning. Can you make that possible? Jonas glanced toward the humming machinery in the corridor beyond the doorway. The rotating wash chambers shift cycles every few hours. During the overlap, the resonance from the turbines disrupts the estate's audio sensors. If I adjust my supply inspections, no one will think twice about you being there. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, and I could bring more than permission. I hear things, policy arguments, deployment plans, family disputes. They forget I'm standing right there. If I share that knowledge with you, with all of you, we're not just trading secrets. We're building a spy network. Every word we exchange would be treason. I know, she breathed. But at least we won't be dying alone. Something in her broke then. Soft, muffled, a laugh with no joy in it. You should go. Before someone wonders why you're still here. He turned to leave, but she stopped him with one last fragile thread of thought. You were right about the gardens, she murmured. But you should understand something. In xenoflora studies, when you force species from different worlds into the same soil, what forms is slow, mesmerizing, and catastrophic. Something new takes shape, something never seen before. But creation usually requires tearing down whatever stood there first. Is that supposed to be a warning? It's simply the truth, she said. What we do with it, that's the dangerous part. In the weeks that followed, the changes were nearly invisible, but relentless. Work routes shifted, overlaps increased. The enslaved drifted past one another with seconds to spare, long enough for a whispered number, a symbol pressed into a palm. A fragment of intel moved from one set of hands to another. Serenia carefully altered her oversight paths, hiding meaning inside routine. Piece by piece, an image formed. A mosaic of empire weaknesses, blind angles, command gaps. And in the tribunal gardens, the transplanted flora continued their quiet rebellion, roots weaving beneath the soil like conspirators preparing to break the surface the moment the environment cracked. 6 months rewrote the political landscape without a single public tremor. As chair of the Restoration Council, Serenia visited 47 noble estates, every tour a disguised reconnaissance of hidden escape paths and sympathetic workers. Meanwhile, Jonas had transformed into a translator, bridging the Empire's mechanical systems with the psychological needs of the enslaved. He studied through the nights, and during the days he passed that knowledge to those who had finally begun to believe that imperial power was not eternal. The illusion shattered on a quiet morning at Admiral Riven's estate. 3 workers gone. "Removed," a guard said flatly when Serenia asked. They were caught experimenting with their control bands. Tried some trick they must have learned from someone. The Admiral made an example of them. The air seemed to freeze around Serenia's lungs. "Have you reported this?" "Already done. High Command ordered a district-wide integrity audit. Every collar in every estate will be checked. It begins next week." Her pulse spiked. She sent an encoded burst to Jonas, cold front descending, roots uncovered. Minutes later, he summoned the network to the laundry nexus. The turbine roar masked their gathering. "They know," Jonas said to the cluster of faces, the Glillian with shimmering plates, the Renorian pair with mirrored eyes, and a dozen others, not about us specifically. But they know enslaved workers are sharing technical knowledge. A full collar verification is coming. Anyone whose band shows irregularities. "Execution," the Glillian muttered. "And memory extraction before that." "Not if we move first," Jonas said. The silence compressed until it felt like a star collapsing into itself. "You're proposing active revolt," one of the Renorian twins whispered. "No," Jonas said. "I'm proposing survival. We have 7 days. Either we scatter or redirect the investigation entirely." "How?" another asked. "We're unarmed. We're trapped behind noble walls. We take off the bands," Jonas said. Nervous laughter, then disbelief. "That's a death sentence." "Not necessarily. There's a flaw in the failsafes. During forced recalibration, every protective subroutine pauses for a few seconds. If we trigger that state manually while running harmonic pulses, we can trick the collars into believing their hosts are dead. They'll shut down instead of detonating." "How long would we have to imitate death?" 4 minutes, he said. Heartbeat under 5 per minute. Brain activity at theta minimum. Body temperature down by 10 degrees. If the timing is wrong, even by seconds, we actually die. And suppose it works, what then? We're still locked inside fortified estates. "We won't be," Jonas said, igniting a crystalline shard. A hologram unfurled, 47 estates glowing across the capital district, thin corridors connecting them like veins. If every cell triggers the shutdown at the exact same moment, Empire security will overload. Their systems can respond to a single uprising, not to 50 at once. In the confusion, we move through the emergency infrastructure. We use their own evacuation tunnels against them. "Move where?" the Glillian asked. Jonas pointed to the center of the projection. "The Sovereign Gardens." The Glillian barked a sharp, incredulous laugh. "The Empire's sacred center? The most protected land on the planet? That's suicide dressed up as symbolism." "Not suicide," Jonas said quietly. "Evolution. Think about what the gardens represent, species taken from there, conquered worlds and rooted here as trophies." "Well," Serenia said, her voice steady despite the fear twisting inside her, "that's exactly what we are." "If we seize the Heart Conservatory," Jonas said, tracing a glowing circle across the hologram, "we stop being phantoms the Empire can pretend not to see. We become undeniable. We make them face the truth that their prized sanctuary is nowhere near as controlled as they've convinced themselves." The Glillian's voice thinned into a hiss. "They'll eradicate us in minutes." "And those minutes will echo," Jonas replied. "Every citizen will witness it. Every bonded worker in every district will see that resistance isn't impossible. And the nobles will learn their grip is weaker than they believed. When you shatter an illusion, it never reforms clean. So you want us to die for some grand symbol?" "I want us to die trying to mean something," he said quietly, "instead of drifting through life as proof that rebellion can't happen." The group exchanged glances, something silent, heavy, unanimous, a realization settling across them. Jonas had spoken aloud the thing they were all terrified to admit. Later that night, Serenia found him alone near the moonlit pools of the gardens. They're going to slaughter us, she said. The verification sweep will find the tampered collars. They'll trace the anomaly. Every last one of us is finished. I know, he answered, which is why we aren't waiting for them to kill us. We're going to strike the gardens ourselves. He laid out every detail. Serenia listened, face shifting through disbelief. Alarm, careful analysis, and something deeper. That's not a revolt, she whispered. That's a funeral pyre we climb into willingly. Yes, Jonas said, but it's the only move left on the board. She stepped toward the ancient fountain, water rippling in fractured silver. 6 months. 6 months of building this fragile network piece by piece. And now you want me to turn it into an army. Soldiers in a war none of them agreed to fight. I'm asking you to give them a choice, he said softly. To die as inventory, or to die as living beings. And if I refuse, if I help people vanish instead, quiet escapes, scattered havens, some would survive. And the lattice collapses, he said. And months from now or years the empire spreads again. New chains. New worlds claimed. Nothing changes. You're assuming change is possible. Then let it be performance, Jonas said, eyes blazing. Let it be the most impossible, unforgettable visual the empire has ever seen. Because spectacle has weight. Narratives take root. Images embed themselves. The moment will live long after we don't. He touched her shoulder gently. I'm not asking you to believe we win. I'm asking you to believe the attempt matters. That we matter. That even failure, especially failure, can be radiant enough to be remembered. Human enough to prove we were never objects. Serenia felt tears streak down her cheeks. I hate you, she said, voice trembling. I hate that you handed me hope. That you dragged me out of numbness and forced me to choose between safe insignificance and meaningful danger. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. And also not sorry. Somehow both truths fit. If we do this, she said, steadying herself, everyone must understand. This isn't rebellion. It's sacrifice, offered freely, with no delusion of survival. Agreed, he said. We show them the plan. We show them the price, and each being chooses their own fate. 7 days before the verification begins, she said. 6 days for us to reach every node, explain the plan, and build perfect synchronization. Jonas nodded. We'll use the gardens themselves. Your committee distributes flora across the estates. What if those samples carry encoded messages, root signals, biochemical patterns, living storage inside their cells? Serenia went still. They monitor every data pulse. But they don't monitor plants. Her training unfurled in her mind like a flower opening. It would work, she whispered. Some species imprint entire messages in their growth rings and pigment shifts. If we select the right cultivars, anyone trained to read the patterns will receive the entire plan, a slow revolution hidden in plain sight. They worked until the moons dipped low, crafting a biological language that no imperial scanner could interpret. By dawn, they had created something elegant and terrifying. The next 6 days would decide everything, whether their garden of defiance had grown, deep enough roots to survive, or whether the empire's frost would kill every shoot before it could bloom. On the final night, the tribunal gardens were achingly beautiful. Twin moons cast amethyst and molten gold across hundreds of luminous species, gathered from worlds the empire had claimed. Governor Varos held his monthly conclave, hundreds of elites, murmuring over political fractures widening by the day. Earlier that afternoon, Serenia had distributed the last coded plants. By her count, 247 enslaved souls across 47 estates had signaled they were willing. 247 individuals prepared to die for a symbol. The signal would be unmistakable. When every one of the bioluminescent bloom clusters flushed into synchronized crimson, an event botanically impossible, without intervention, the uprising would begin, and at midnight on the 7th day, it happened. Across the capital district, in 47 estates at once, the enslaved enacted Jonas's protocol. Heartbeats slowed to near death, breath thinned to nothing, bodies dropping into cold imitation of lifelessness. Across the capital district, bodies lay still in choreographed death, hearts slowed to a whisper, temperatures plummeting, neural signatures dimming into the faintest embers. The harmonic pulses hummed through their collars like distant ghosts, whispering a single lie: your host has died. It worked for most. Of the 247 who attempted the protocol, 231 revived with their collars dark and silent for the first time in years. 16 never opened their eyes again, their fail-safes detonating instantly. Small, quiet deaths absorbed into the cost they had all agreed to bear. In the Varun estate, Jonas gasped like someone exploding out of deep water. For the first time in 9 months, he felt nothing around his neck, not weight, not electric threat, not ownership. The Glalian beside him trembled awake. The Saren twins collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing with relief and grief all tangled together. And then, in the tribunal gardens, the signal bloomed. Every bioluminescent petal flashed into impossible scarlet. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Music dissolved into silence. Governor Varos lifted his head sharply, the shift in his expression like stone cracking. The garden gates, supposed to be sealed, yawned open as if inviting a storm. They opened because Serenia had sabotaged the locking conduits weeks earlier. And through the emergency corridors they came. Freed beings staggering from corridors and tunnels, some limping, some sprinting, most carrying nothing but raw determination. A few held makeshift weapons, sharpened tools, broken beams, but most simply carried each other. Security units surged forward, but the systems they relied on were built to contain individual uprisings, not a synchronized flood. The first wave was absorbed. The second broke through. The third shattered what remained. Within minutes, the impossible became real. The Empire's prized garden was being claimed by the people it had labeled as property, and the military couldn't retake it without destroying the conservatory itself. Doing so would confirm exactly what Jonas had predicted, that their authority relied not on order, but on violence against the very symbols they pretended embodied their civilization. Jonas arrived with the fourth wave.
He found Serenia by the moon-splashed fountain.
Still dressed in the ceremony silks her husband insisted she wear. Her presence confused security teams. They assumed she'd been taken hostage. "You came," she breathed. "All of us came," Jonas said. Around them, the network took shape. The Glilian directing defensive lines, the Saren twins relaying signals, others forming barriers, supporting the wounded, preparing their final stand. Across the garden, High Magistrate Foran, Serenia's husband, finally recognized her among the insurgents. Rage warped his features. "This is treason!" he shouted. "The sentence is execution." "We know the sentence," Jonas replied, voice unwavering. "We've always known. This isn't a plea for mercy. This is a declaration that the people you labeled inventory are, in fact, people." Commander Ralvek snarled. "You've seized a garden for 10 minutes. That's your grand achievement before you're erased." "It's everything," Serenia said, stepping beside Jonas. "Because everyone in this capital is watching. Those who wear collars see that defiance is not a fantasy. The nobles see their dominion is not absolute. And the citizens who swallowed the Empire's lies see what they truly stand on." She turned to her husband, voice trembling but unbroken. "I hated you," she said. "Hated every smile I forced, every decree I stayed silent for. But I hated myself even more for accepting the life you built around me. Tonight I stop accepting. If the cost of being real is death, then we choose death. But we choose it loudly. We choose it unmistakably." Legions of armored troops encircled the gardens. Heavy cannons locked into place. The order to eliminate was a single command away. But the conservatory had become part of the message. To annihilate it would reveal to the entire capital that their symbols meant nothing next to their hunger for control. Governor Varos stepped forward. "You have until dawn to surrender. Those who comply will be reconditioned. Those who stay will be purged." "No," Jonas said, calm as still water. "We're not leaving. You choose whether this garden stands with us, inside it, or whether you destroy your own sanctuaries to keep your power intact." Night deepened. No one moved. The freed stood together knowing they were already dead. Yet their stillness carried a serenity the military couldn't understand, a quiet resolve that made the soldiers uneasy. And then came the unexpected. From all across the capital, others arrived, still collared, still bound, still owned. They didn't join the rebellion. They simply stood surrounding the garden walls, silent witnesses, a ring of onlookers, their presence more powerful than any weapon. That circle of witnesses revealed the uprising's true purpose. It had never been about controlling the garden. It had always been about forcing the Empire to choose symbols or absolute rule. Voran approached the perimeter, stopping at the red line of containment. "This changes nothing," he hissed. "You'll die. All of you. And the Empire will continue unchanged. 50 years from now, your names won't even be footnotes." "You're right," Serenia said softly. "We won't be remembered. But we changed tonight. Him, me, everyone who chose to stand here. We are not possessions anymore. And that shift, just that, her voice hardened. That's a victory no execution can erase. Enough, she whispered, her voice steady in a way that felt like a declaration carved into stone. Legacy isn't what defines a life. The only thing that ever matters is the moment you choose who you are. And we made our choice freely. Finally. Foran stared at her as though, seeing a stranger wearing the face of the woman he had lived beside for a decade, for the first time, he seemed to understand what she had always concealed beneath practiced smiles and perfect etiquette. I might have cared for you, he said softly. If you'd been smaller, easier, something I could control. But you insisted on being more, and more is always dangerous. She didn't flinch. Then I'm grateful to be dangerous. Dawn swept over the Celestine Gardens like a slow-spreading fire. The twin moons dipped out of sight as Sol Athrin rose, exposing transplanted ecosystems, the liberated who had reclaimed their breath, and the armored regiments ready to erase them all with a single command. The order came. The strike commander checked the authorization, jaw tightening. Commence firing. Charged weaponry hummed awake. A focused plasma lance tore into the garden's outer veil, shattering the barrier in a cascade of white-blue sparks. Before the next volley discharged, someone stepped into the line of fire, High Matron Saraline. Her intervention was so unthinkable that the gunners froze mid-sequence. In those stunned seconds, nearly 30 nobles moved beside her, 30 out of 300, but enough to fracture the illusion of unity. Move aside, the commander barked. This is a sanctioned execution. Saraline's voice remained gentle but immovable. This is the killing of sentient beings for daring to speak. I won't allow it to happen in silence. Interfere and you'll be charged with obstruction. Then charge me, she said. Charge every one of us. And understand, each noble you condemn becomes a clan you lose. Every life you end forces the rest of our houses to decide whether they stand with you or against you. If you begin killing your own citizens for disagreeing, you admit your power survives only through fear. The battle was no longer military. It had mutated into a political crisis. Governor Vaynar pushed through the tension toward Saraline, his expression strained. What exactly are you suggesting? Deliberation, she answered. These people risked everything to expose a wound we've ignored. It's a crisis, yes, but crises are openings. We can either adapt or collapse under the weight of our own rigidity. You want to dismantle indenture because of a garden occupation? I'm saying any structure that demands constant brutality to function is unsustainable, and unsustainable empires don't last. What followed was a 3-day upheaval. Debates, accusations, emergency councils. The freed insurgents were escorted into holding chambers, not executed but formally detained. Their fate was tangled in politics, noble dissent, and an empire suddenly aware of its own fragility. Jonas and Serenia, confined in adjoining cells separated by a transparent containment wall, could hear the endless arguments through the facility audio. They had braced for death. Instead, they received food, medics, rest. A confusion they didn't understand but didn't dare trust. We did it, Serenia murmured through the wall. Not the ending we expected, but we made space they can't close back up. It's enough, Jonas said. Even if they erase us tomorrow, we showed them something. That resistance grows like wild roots through stone, through metal, through fear. My grim realist, she teased gently. I know our odds, but I also know we mattered, and sometimes that's the only victory anyone gets. The High Assembly's ruling broke every precedent in imperial history, exile instead of eradication. A single colony vessel, a distant frontier, far enough that their ideas couldn't infect the core, but far enough to keep them alive. This isn't kindness, Governor Vaynar told them, voice clipped. It's strategy. If we execute you, the philosophical wing fractures the empire. We're avoiding civil war by removing you from its heart. Every survivor chose exile. All 231. The morning they departed, both moons hung pale against the cobalt sky. The transport lifted from the cradle docks, its engines echoing through the spired city as if marking a funeral and a birth at the same time. Jonas watched the world of Etherian diminish to a faint glimmer beyond the viewport. Serenia approached quietly, her fingers slipping into his, undaunted for the first time, unclaimed by any empire. Do you think anyone will remember us? She asked. The ones who need to already do, he replied. The collared, the silenced, the witnesses who lined the gardens. They saw what it looked like when people stepped beyond the cages they were assigned. That vision doesn't die. Once planted, it grows. Gardens again, she said with a tired smile. You truly listened to my horticulture lessons. I've had an exceptional mentor. They stood together as starlines stretched past the hull, carrying them toward territories where imperial law faded into myth, where uprooted things could, perhaps, grow wild again. Behind them, 229. Others from dozens of species began, shaping the first threads of something unimaginable. A community, not... They weren't building a settlement, founded on conquest or rank or inherited dominance. What they intended to create was something much more delicate, much more radical. A place shaped by the belief that every mind, every spark of awareness deserved recognition. It would be messy. It would stumble. It would fracture in ways none of them could anticipate, but it would be theirs. Their attempt. Their soil. Their wild garden. Serenya's voice softened as she leaned against the rail beside Jonas, watching the star lines twist into pale ribbons. Tell me something. Do you think this, us choosing each other, choosing to stand together, is part of the uprising? Or is it just a small happiness we snatched when no one was looking? Jonas didn't answer quickly. He considered it, truly considered it, the way he always did when the stakes were emotional rather than strategic. I think the rebellion was always rooted in the personal, he said. Empires collapse not because of fleets lost or fortresses overrun, but because countless individuals quietly decide their joy, their identity, their right to love who they love, matters more than the Empire's version of order. So yes, this moment, our moment, is part of it, maybe the most important part. The moment we stop surviving and start living. She rested her forehead against his shoulder, her amethyst skin warm beneath the ship's muted lights. Two beings from two very different worlds, drawn together in the Empire's bleakest corridors, now choosing without permission, without fear, to grow toward something brighter. Far behind them, in the Celestine gardens they had left in upheaval, the bioluminescent flora were shifting again. New color patterns shimmered across petals, reactions triggered by roots that had spent years intertwining in secret beneath the soil. Their glow told a story the Empire couldn't yet read. Across aristocratic estates and labor districts, low whispers had begun, threading through maintenance. Tunnels and laundry wells encoded, messages traded between the collared and the overlooked, timid alliances, invisible networks, seedlings of dissent that would take years to surface but were already alive in the hidden cracks of the capital. The Empire would march on. It would annex star systems. It would preach stability and obedience with the same tired certainty. But it would never again rest easy in its own eternity. Because once someone witnesses a controlled garden grow feral, once they see uprooted lives reclaim their own shape, once they watch a person labeled as property stand, upright as a person, that vision becomes irreversible. It burns quietly through the mind, stubborn as light under a closed door. Revolutions rarely erupt like supernovas. More often, they creep like roots, slow, persistent, splitting stone molecule by molecule. Life always finds a way to push through places designed to contain it. And in that persistence, in the refusal to accept that the universe must remain as it is, the real revolution begins, quiet, patient, unignorable. Empires forget that they, too, were constructed, planted, shaped by choices made long before they existed. And anything planted, given enough time, inevitably remembers how to grow wild again. The colony vessel surged into superluminal slip space, carrying its fragile cargo of the unshackled into an open future. A future uncertain, imperfect but immeasurably better than the absolute certainty behind them. In the shimmering expanse between stars, where time stretched thin and reality trembled like water, Jonas and Serenia held each other with a peace they had never been allowed to possess. They had already won the victory that mattered most. They had chosen each other, freely, defiantly, irrevocably, and no empire, no decree, no memory wipe could ever reclaim that choice. The gardens would remember, and the transplanted souls would grow.